You are listening to Digging In Podcast, presented by Rooted Wealth Advisors.
Welcome into another episode of the Digging In Podcast. I'm your host, Kenjo Kelly, helping you get those questions answered to and through retirement. Today, I find myself in Champaign, Illinois, joined by the one, the only, John Savarino.
Woo!
How you doing, man?
Welcome to Champaign. I'm doing fantastic. Super excited to dig in a little bit with you here.
And it's always nice to be in your neck of the woods. I like what you've done with the place.
Thank you.
It looks very rooted.
Pretty proud of it, to be honest. But yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
There you go. I know it was a labor of love trying to get this place up to brand standards, as we say in the biz.
That's right.
But you've done a nice job, man.
I appreciate that. We had just been talking about it earlier. Every time Zach seems to come down, he's always willing to pick out a thing or two. So it's good to hear some positive feedback.
It's all good. It's all good. Hey, man, I know you've been driving the race car a lot this summer.
Yeah.
And I was hoping you could help me out. You're always great at the analogy thing.
Yep, okay.
I found myself at an event the other night, and as you know, we pride ourselves in being holistic financial planners.
Absolutely.
And a lady stops me the other night at this event, and she's like, "What do you mean by holistic?" And I was like, you know what? That's a really good question. I tried my best to kind of meander through the answer, but I'm no financial planner.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would you suggest as like a good analogy or something like that? If you get asked that, which I'm sure you have,
Yeah.
what's the way you go about explaining what we do?
Well, I mean, it's a great question, especially if you look up the actual definition. If you just Google holistic, the answer that it's going to provide you is probably going to confuse you even more. So I think a couple good examples. I think one relative to our industry is when you have investments, right, in some type of account, typically we're focused on one thing and one thing only: performance, right? How good is my investments doing? But if they're not being built in, say, a tax-efficient manner, then you're actually losing money to taxes. So making sure we're looking at it from a couple different lenses is a really great example of a holistic approach in this industry. But it's so ironic that you asked me that question, because I think a good analogy to kind of circle racing into it is for those of you that don't know, I build engines and transmissions with my father as well for our own race car. And I had gone to this engine building class pretty recently, actually. And, one of the parts of the class was, synergy through a systems approach. And, the example that I'll give you is for an example, if I were to change piston rings in my engine trying to get more horsepower out of the engine, well, you're actually changing the entire system of your engine. And if you're not doing it the correct way when it comes to setting, the right clearances and other, parts and pieces, then you're actually going to lose horsepower, right? So just by, throwing a new part at it, thinking you're going to get an extra few horsepower, is actually sending the entire system out of whack, thus decreasing, output and horsepower in the motor. So the same concept would apply to our finances, right? Just by throwing a little bit more money at our investment or putting it to, this stock that's done really well over the last 2 years, while it might look and sound sexy, such as new piston rings, it could be throwing everything else of your plan out of whack, which is why we have to look at it from a holistic perspective.
You mean you can't just call up your financial advisor and say, hey, I want to buy XYZ stock? That you actually have to take a look at the entire plan as a whole and how that might affect it?
Well, as you know, I'm here to advise, but ultimately I serve. So if they tell me to buy XYZ stock, I'll buy it for them, but we might have a conversation beforehand.
Always good, always good. How do you go about having that conversation with people about, like, you are so focused on doing this one thing, how do you get them to maybe zoom out and take that like bigger look, bigger approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. Typically, I love to do illustrations. You've sat in a few of my meetings, and I love going to the whiteboard. Those of you that have watched the show Talking Money, half the time on the whiteboard just trying to illustrate those concepts. So it's typically, through education, right? Educating the clients on, what we're discussing so they can feel more confident in what that might be. And then just starting to start to paint the landscape of what their situation looks like through illustrations. That's what I've found the best way people learn. And by learning, they feel confidence in this holistic approach that we do.
So next time I should just tell the lady not to change her piston rings.
Don't just change your piston rings.
Change the piston
Many
rings.
different factors that go into it. But no, in all seriousness, we take this 5 worlds in retirement approach to where it's not just about the investments. While it's super, super important, but what's just as important is taxes and making sure that we're doing some sort of tax planning, which is going to look different for every single client. There's no quote unquote cookie cutter approach. In addition to that, just making sure we're doing some income planning, healthcare, and legacy. Those are the 5 worlds. And by taking that approach, we are being very holistic with our planning.
And for those of you that are new and are just hearing 5 worlds approach, that's nothing new, right?
No.
We've always kind of looked at a financial plan from a 5 worlds viewpoint, but just in this past year, with Zach's really direction on service and kind of like showing our work, like in class, like, hey, how did you get the answer? Well, show your work. Like, we really want to show people that we really have a heart for service and are doing things behind the scenes. So this is why the 5 worlds verbiage is just kind of coming to light. We want to actually tell people what we're actually talking about. Walk us through, you rattled them off real high level.
Yeah.
Income, taxes, healthcare. What am I missing, John?
Legacy
planning.
Yep. Investments.
So can you break it down a little more for me?
Yeah, start taking maybe some bites off of that.
Yeah.
So when it comes to income, right, I would consider income as going to be really the first world that we're discussing, really when it comes to those that are nearing retirement or already in retirement, and to kind of keep things somewhat high level instead of getting into the weeds on that, what are our income sources, right? And how are these different income sources going to work through what I call a systems approach, right? They all work in unison together. So maybe we're trying to time Social Security in a little bit more strategic manner instead of just taking it right away because that's what our friends told us to do. We really want to really look at it from a lot of different angles and a lot of different lenses, and just make sure we're maximizing the income that we're going to have in retirement. Investments wise, yes, of course we want to put up really great returns. But for those that are nearing retirement, already in retirement, which most of our clients are, risk management is going to be a huge key when it comes to investments. Now, what I mean by that is always we're trying to maximize as much growth as we can, but we're really trying to significantly minimize downside losses in retirement. Because as you know, I wrote an article for Yahoo Finance about compounding interest, and with enough time, it's great, but it can work against you in a short window of time. But I think even more important to that is just fees, right? We try and we are extremely fee conscious when it comes to what type of management fee are our clients paying, but where are all these other hidden fees that a lot of other firms and institutions have, even on the funds themselves, right? And we take great pride in being extremely cost efficient because it's our clients' hard-earned money. Taxes, I kind of touched on that, but very simply, it's not always about how much money we have, it's about how much money we get to keep, and we take it so many steps further than, in my humble opinion, a lot of other firms out there. And that's why we have multiple CPAs on our retainer, we have a tax law attorney. It's for the benefit of our clients because we're committed to them, and their finances and their legacy, which leads me to another world, which would be legacy, right? And that can be more important to some than others in terms of leaving money to kids, grandkids, or maybe a charity or church. But it's even as simple as just making sure we have the right beneficiaries. A little shameless plug. One of my Talking Money episodes that should be coming out soon is about the importance of checking those beneficiaries and how it could save you tens of thousands of dollars in taxes, if not more. And then just healthcare, right? How are we going to pay for healthcare? Obviously the biggest question mark we have is how long are we going to live and how healthy is that going to be? So it's almost a hope for the best mentality, but we have to plan for the worst when it comes to healthcare. But that's just a really high level example of what we're looking at with each individual and respective world.
That's awesome, man. I mean, that's a lot. It's a lot to digest. I feel like we could do an episode on each piece of that world.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll save that for another time. But
good idea.
Man, it's always good to talk to you. We actually have a quiz where people could take it and find out their gap for retirement.
Okay.
So it breaks down the 5 worlds. I'll link that in the description below, so you guys can do that. And then, maybe call and sit down with my guy John here. We need more people to come through the Champaign and Bloomington offices and chat with this guy. He gets really lonely down here.
We do. Luckily I got Emily, Andrew down here. We got Jason, actually one of the attorneys that we share a relationship with as well in the office. But yes, I miss some of the camaraderie up in our HQ, aka Bourbonnais, Illinois. So it's good to have you down here.
That'll do it for this episode of the Digging In podcast. Until next time, keep digging in.
This was Digging In Podcast, presented by Rooted Wealth Advisors.